Our gospel reading for this morning comes near the end of Mark's gospel as Jesus is finishing his ministry in Jerusalem prior to his arrest. He comes out of the temple one last time. Listen now for what the Spirit is saying to us. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, James and Peter and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign that these things are all about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nations will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pang." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Some of you know that I teach a weekday Bible study here on occasions, which typically spends 10 or so weeks looking at a single book from the Bible. And over the years we have done Genesis and Exodus and the Psalms and 1st and 2nd Samuel, which tell the story of King David. And from the New Testament we've done all the Gospels, and we've done Acts and Paul's letter to the Romans and the 1 Corinthians, and now we're doing Revelation, or more properly, the Revelation to John. Now, Revelation is one of those exotic books that doesn't come up for much everyday use in the church. It rarely shows up as reading on Sunday, and many Christians have developed the notion that it is primarily a collection of hard-to-understand predictions about the future that has little to do with the day-to-day life of faith. And so, run-of-the-mill mainstream Christians like us Presbyterians have often just left Revelation to the lunatic fringe. We've let folks like Hal Lindsey and the authors of the Left Behind novels define Revelation for us as a book of precise timetables and predictions which forecast things happening in our present day. Never mind that John writes the letter to first century Christians in what is now Turkey. Now, when I decided to take up Revelation for this fall's study, it wasn't because I was all that excited about the topic. We'd done all the Gospels and a number of Paul's letters, and it seemed like it might be a nice change of pace that maybe would be a decent draw. And I supposed it would be a good idea to provide an alternate reading to those which see the rapture and thermonuclear battles in the pages of Revelation. And I started to prepare the study with more than a little trepidation. But I have discovered that I have been more energized and excited by this particular Bible study than any I have done in quite a few years. And it has been wonderful to reclaim the original purposes of Revelation as a letter meant to inspire Christians to live faithful lives in very difficult times. But I have also gained a much deeper appreciation myself of prophecy and of Scripture writings in general that has allowed me to hear not just Revelation but other passages in Scripture with new ears. Now, since many of us mistakenly think that prophecy is just about predicting the future, We may have heard precisely that from Jesus when he spoke in our reading today, simply Jesus predicting what would happen when he talked of not one stone being on another at the great temple. And Jesus, of course, is a good prophet because it turns out, in fact, that the temple is destroyed 30 or so years later. But when I hear these words with new ears, listening for how these words were meant to sustain and build up the community of faith, the church to which Mark writes, I hear a lot more than just a prediction. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are the author of our scripture reading for this morning, our New Testament reading for this morning. Now, it turns out we don't actually know the name of the person who wrote the Gospel of Mark, but since we have no other name to use, imagine you are Mark. And you are getting ready to write the very first of the four Gospels, although you don't know that's what you're about to do. You don't know that it will end up later in something called the New Testament. You are writing to your community of faith, to your congregation. And it's been a while, 30 years or so, since Jesus died and was raised. And during a good deal of that time, people have been content simply to remember what Jesus did, to remember what he said. And over the years, some of that has gotten set down, collections of Jesus' sayings. But as time has worn on, you think something more is required. You need to put down what Jesus did and what he said so that Christians, and especially new Christians, can understand who he was and what he was about. You want to tell his story, but you're not a historian. You're not all that concerned with getting the facts exactly straight. You're much more worried that your people grow in faith. You want your people to have a faith that they can live out in the world, and you are worried about this because you live in a very tumultuous time. Now, we don't know the exact year when Mark is written, but we have a pretty good idea. It's right around the time of a big rebellion against Rome in Israel. A rebellion that, by the way, Rome squashed, eventually destroying Jerusalem along with its grand temple. When the Romans got through with the temple, all that was left of it was a little bit of a retaining wall that had been on the side of the hill on which the temple sat. We call it now the Wailing Wall. And it seems likely that Mark wrote his gospel a little before the destruction of the temple. But regardless, it's clear that he wrote in a time when the world seemed to be coming unglued. The mentally unstable Nero sat on the throne as emperor. There was a catastrophic fire that had burned down much of Rome, and the Christians and the Jews had been used as scapegoats, unleashing a persecution that may well have led to the executions of Peter and Paul. And if you are Mark, this is the world your congregation lives in. These are the concerns that are facing your members that you have in mind as you start to write down what will later be called a gospel. And so you want to communicate something to your people, not only of who Jesus was, but of what it means to live a Christian life in this terribly anxious time around 70 AD. And so when you report Jesus